Hi everybody, Amy here checking in for week 3, our first workshop discussion week, and I've really enjoyed reading your rough drafts of the narrative essay. So I'm going to talk about those as well as some of your assignments that you turned in for week 2 and some of the other things we've got going on here. The first thing I want to talk about is just our quiz from last week, which covered subjects and verbs. For the most part, everyone did really, really well on this quiz. It was actually one of our highest scoring quizzes. Well, it was our highest scoring quiz of the semester, but for me as an instructor, it's one of my highest scoring quizzes ever. So you guys are doing awesome. Way to go. I'm just going to show you, there were a couple of outliers. So when I say this is one of my highest scoring quizzes that I've ever assigned, I mean that there are only 2 questions that all of you did not, or excuse me, 80% of you did not get correct. So you can see for all these questions, at least 80% of you got it right, except for question 7 and question 9. So I'm going to show you those. One of them is just kind of a tricky example that they're trying to throw you, and the other is a rule that you have to memorize. So this is our first one. It's an example. It's asking you, what is the subject in this example? Mr. Bill's shoes are invisible beneath his trousers. So what I always tell people is a sentence has 2 things, a subject and a verb. And if something is a pseudo sentence, it is at the very least going to have a verb. So sentences need subjects and verbs, but at the very, very, very least they need verbs. So if I were to say to you, go, you would know what I'm trying to convey. Whereas if I said dog, you might not know what I mean by that. So that's why I always say verbs are more important. So the first thing you want to identify is the verb in the sentence. In this case, there is actually only one verb. It's a variation of the verb to be. It's are. And so then we just need to figure out what person, place, or thing, or what is performing that action. So in this case, we only have one action. We have to figure out what is acting that way. So what is, or are, if it's plural, invisible beneath his trousers? Is it Mr. Bill himself, or is it his shoes? Well, I would guess that Mr. Bill in his entirety is not invisible beneath his pants. So maybe his shoes are just invisible beneath his pants. So in this case, the correct answer is shoes. It's not Mr. Bill himself that's invisible, and it's not the trousers that is invisible either. This is the actual object of the sentence, which is something we'll get to a little bit further down the road when we get to some more sophisticated grammar rules. So then the only other question that you guys didn't get at least an 80% success rate on was question 9, which is just a rule that you need to memorize. So it's a true or false question asking you if the subject can appear inside of a prepositional phrase. And the answer for that is no, because prepositional phrases are always subordinate, and therefore they are always a dependent clause. And remember that sentences are independent clauses. They can stand on their own. So if something is dependent, then by definition, it is not part of the complete sentence, or at least it is not the part of the complete sentence that can stand on its own in the independent clause, which would be the subject and the primary action of the sentence. So remember that the subject is whatever is performing that primary action, whatever is the central verb within the sentence being performed by who or whatever, that is going to be the subject of the sentence. So in this case, it is true. The subject cannot be located inside of a prepositional phrase because prepositional phrases by definition are subordinate or dependent clauses. So again, that's just one of those rules that you have to memorize, unfortunately. Some of grammar is just memorization. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is your rough drafts themselves. I kind of led off with this a minute ago, and it's my primary concern at this point. So anytime you have a paper coming up due very soon, I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to these rough drafts. And I have in fact read through all of your rough drafts, and they are kind of in various states of completion, but that's okay. I know that we're all kind of in different places right now. I'm going to bring up some examples here, and I'm only going to bring up examples that I think are definitely on the right track. So if I mention you here or give you a suggestion of something to work on, rest assured I'm only using you as an example because I feel comfortable doing so, because I know you're already in pretty good shape. So please don't be offended. I'm only picking on the people that I think are already doing really well. And that said, I'm going to use Jonathan as an example because his partner didn't post, and so we can reasonably assume that he's probably not going to get any feedback, and so I want to make sure he gets a little bit extra feedback so that he knows what's working and what's not working in his actual draft. So I'm going to start with that, and I want to talk just a little bit about his essay because it's in pretty good shape, but it also has some things he could work on, as I suggested a second ago. So Jonathan, I think you have something here that is a really good place for us to start in terms of everyone being able to see what you do need to include in your essay. So Jonathan has a really strong introduction. He's using an anecdote for his hook strategy and then using that to blend into his background information. One thing I do want to mention is that he's got this perfectly formatted, so if anybody's wondering how to format their essay, you can look at Jonathan's as an example. Then, as I said, or as I was saying, Jonathan's got some background information here. If anything, Jonathan, I think you could use a little bit more concrete details to show us, you know, what about life was grand? Give me an example. How did it feel when you were in the avalanche? You say it put you on the sidelines. But what exactly does that mean? Like, can you tell us exactly how your life changed at that point, or give us, again, an example of it? That's really the only thing I can think of, because otherwise this is a pretty good amount of background. And then from there you can see we go right into Jonathan's thesis. So he says there are going to be many unique obstacles to overcome in earning an AA in English. However, I know if I work hard, practice disciplined time management, and focus equally on all my current and future classes, I can reach my goal of graduating within 4 semesters. And so what we have here is a SMART goal, and then we have 3 steps, which are the attainable part, or how Jonathan is going to achieve that goal. So the reason I called this a SMART goal is because there's no time frame listed here. I would say, Jonathan, just add to this maybe like 2 years or 4 semesters or 5 or 6 or 7 semesters, or however long you think it's going to take you to actually get your AA. But otherwise, this is a very specific goal. It'll be measurable once you have your diploma in hand. It's attainable because you have listed the things that you'll need to do to make it happen, and it is relevant. Oh, actually, now I'm noticing you talk a little bit about why it's relevant here, but in your actual thesis statement, you maybe want to add to a little statement about like how this will help you in your life, you know, to improve your situation or advance in your career. I think you can just add those in again as little prepositional phrases. So, to learn more about literature, or to get a better job. I want to get my AA in English in 3 years. There's going to be many obstacles, but if I work hard, practice discipline, time management, etc., etc. So you can, if you have to, break it up into 2 sentences, or you can just use a semicolon there to separate 2 independent clauses if you don't want them to be 2 separate complete sentences. So the next thing I would say about Jonathan's essay is that he does a really good job, again, mapping out those steps to make it attainable, but since these are set up as subpoints to develop your overall primary main idea or the goal itself, these should be the foci of your subsequent body paragraphs. And so from here we can see Jonathan goes into a lot of really, really good concrete details and background information about his experiences mountaineering and his accident, and it's all really good narrative, but it's not focused on this main idea that we were set up to anticipate from the thesis statement. So the thesis statement kind of previews what the reader can expect, and if you don't fulfill that, or if you don't follow along with that, the reader might feel like you know, they've been misled, or feel like, where are we going with this, that kind of thing. So I would say you can narrow down these body paragraphs to focus just on the subpoints that you've outlined here. Working hard, practicing time management, and focusing equally on current and future classes. That'll give you a little bit more direction in terms of what you want each of these body paragraphs to focus on. And then of course you do certainly want to have concrete details and personal examples in those paragraphs, but you can narrow down the examples to just the ones that are relevant to develop the ideas that you're focusing on in each body paragraph. So if your first body paragraph is about work, hard work, then you would give some examples from your life about hard work. And so this is an example that everyone can emulate, because I did notice that was kind of a recurring theme in the drafts that I read, was that a lot of you are not following along with these steps with your actual body paragraph. So if everyone can see how there's kind of a list here of points to be developed in a future paragraphs, that that is what the reader would be expecting. And actually, I'm kind of stumbling over my words because I'm noticing that there is a timeline here of 4 semesters. So I'm sorry, Jonathan, for all those comments that it might get a little lost in the shuffle here at the end, but it's definitely there. So scratch that about the time frame. It is a SMART goal or a SMAT goal. I would just add that little statement about why this is actually relevant to you. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers it for Jonathan's. Jonathan does actually have a really strong conclusion, so it kind of ties in with this narrative that he's been working throughout the previous paragraphs, but it would still be easy to modify and make it flow once you have reworked those paragraphs to focus on the steps to achieve your goal. But there's kind of a perfect blend of restating the thesis and the main supporting points, as well as offering a little bit of reflection there at the end. So those of you who are looking for an example of how to write your conclusion, I think Jonathan has a really strong example for you guys to follow here. So I want to focus specifically on this issue of the body paragraphs following along with what comes up in the thesis. I have a couple of examples of that. One is David's. David is off to a really good start, but again, kind of like Jonathan, I think there's just a little bit of tweaking that needs to happen in order for it to really be a solid frame of organization. So David's thesis is pretty straightforward. He does say that he wants an AA with a 3.0 and it should take 2 years. David, one thing I'll say is that you do want to kind of maybe condense this into a briefer thesis statement instead of 1, 2, 3, 4 sentences. I would move this specific statement of your goal down here into your actual thesis to make it one complete unit. But other than that, you have listed your steps to achieve your goal. You're facing challenges of time management and focus, which you can both overcome with some discipline. So then we have a paragraph that does talk about focus, time management, and then our second paragraph talks about centering my focus and getting work done on time. So I think for this one, he's got a really strong topic sentence. He says time management is a big key factor. So I can match that up with the thesis itself and see that, okay, the first point he previewed here in his thesis was time management. So that makes perfect sense that that is what should come first in the body of the essay. I think this second topic sentence could be a little bit clearer because he mentions time in the topic sentence here as well, which could confuse readers and make them think you're still talking about this first point about time management. So that's just a suggestion. You do mention focus here, but I would leave it at that. Since this paragraph is really supposed to be about your focus, I wouldn't bring time management into the discussion here at all, just so that you have 2 really distinct points. You're also a little bit short of the length requirement here, a minimum of 2 full pages, and so you might decide you want to add maybe a third or even 4th step that you might need to overcome in order to achieve your goal. All right, so in general, again, David, I think you're in pretty good shape. I'm only picking on people here that I think have something pretty solid to work from. I also want to remind all of you that the scope of your essay needs to be something you can actually achieve while you're here at Front Range, but not too limited that it's going to not be relevant to your overall career and larger academic goals. So Kendall was one who mentioned, I just wanted to point out, Kendall, you're in really good shape, but you mentioned that you want to receive a master's degree. You actually can't get a master's degree at Front Range because we're just a community college. We don't offer the 4-year bachelor's or the further graduate master's and PhD degrees. You would need to get an associate's degree here first and then transfer that to a larger university. So a master's degree as your ultimate goal is something to make your goal here for Front Range relevant, but you're not going to be able to develop that plan in a 2-page paper. It's going to be a much larger endeavor. So I would encourage you to just use that master's as kind of like your focal point of why you want to get what you want to get achieved here or get done here at Front Range, but not the goal itself. So what are you trying to do at Front Range that you can plan out in 1 to 2 pages to achieve in order to get you on the first step toward achieving that master's degree, so to speak. Okay, so in general, I think I've covered a lot of the things in the essay, but if you have specific questions about your own draft and things that you maybe think are working or not, be sure to email me about those. You do need to do comments and reflections just like you would in any other weekly discussion, but your comments are a little bit more guided for this assignment because it is a peer review workshop. And so I just want to show you a couple of stronger examples of what I'm looking for. So Jackie in general did a really great job this week. Jackie's essay is probably the closest to being complete of the ones that I saw. So if you're looking for a really good example of everything I've been talking about so far, the rough draft, you know, the thesis, the intro, how the body paragraphs are focused on the steps to achieve the goal, the topic sentences, all of that, you can look at Jackie's. The only thing I think Jackie needs is maybe a few more concrete details to make it a little bit more beefed up and substantial, also longer. But Jackie's comments were really strong that she provided to David. I did ask you guys in the instructions to complete not only the workshop worksheet but also in-text line-by-line comments using the comment feature in Microsoft Word. If you're not familiar with how to do that, I will show it to you here really quickly. You just go to this review tab at the top, and anything that is typed you can highlight and then click new comment, and that's where you can type in what your different comments might be to each other. Save your partner's draft, and then you can upload it again with the comments. But I just want to show you on David's thread here that Jackie has replied and she's done everything that she needs to do for really good peer review feedback. So she is doing not only the worksheet that was provided in the week 3 content materials, but she's also doing the line-by-line feedback that I just mentioned. So here we have the line-by-line stuff. It's kind of the specific instances that you want to point to right on the paper itself, whereas the worksheet is going to give a general summation of the things that need to work on. So let those two documents work hand in hand. Give a kind of an overview of what needs to happen for each of these different elements that are numbered here. And then in the line by line feature in Microsoft Word, you can actually just go in and type, you know, this is where you need to add a topic sentence, or this is where you could be more specific in your thesis, and that kind of thing. So with that, the next thing I want to talk about here is the actual grading of this week's discussion, because it is just a little bit different than a regular weekly discussion. Remember that in workshop weeks, your peer review workshop discussion takes the place of any regular writing prompt discussion. So for this one, you only have to review one of your classmates' drafts, so you're not providing comments to two of your classmates. But that feedback is a lot more substantial because, like I said, you have to do both parts of the review, the worksheet itself, as well as the in-text line-by-line feedback. And then you still have to submit a final reflection at the end of the week, Saturday or Sunday, that kind of summarizes everything you learned this week and also your revision plan for your draft. So what are you planning on working on now that you've gotten the feedback from your partner? And then you can see here just a kind of general breakdown of what the grading entails. So if you don't review your partner's essay, you're definitely going to get a D. If you don't post your reflection at the end of the week that includes your revision plan, you're also going to get a D. So depending on how well you complete all 3 of the required elements, that'll put you up in this passing range, either getting 100%, which is rare, an A, a B, or a C. So if you have questions about how this week's workshop is going to be graded, please don't hesitate to ask me. And then I also want to check in with the narrative essay itself, because you might be wondering, well, now that I've written my rough draft and I'm getting some feedback on it, what am I supposed to do? So I'm going to take us down here to our steps, and believe it or not, we have already worked all the way through step 5 with this week's journal, if you've done that already, and of course your rough draft. And now we're going to be moving on to step 6, which is revising your draft both globally and locally. So I'll just tell you that the things that I've included in the workshop worksheet for this week are all the things that you need to focus on for your global revision. And there's a really famous rhetorician who says, as a rule, everyone should spend about 60% of their time revising on global issues and 40% on local issues. So local issues are things like punctuation, grammar, spelling, and MLA formatting. Those are the things that you can go back at the very end and polish up, but you don't need to spend a lot of time on when you're actually drafting and working through your rough draft. So right now you have your rough drafts written and you're getting substantial feedback on them based on the worksheet, which, as I said, is mostly focused on global revision. So when you enact those changes, you will be revising globally. That's looking for things like how well structured is your thesis? Have you included everything you need to include? Is your introduction engaging? Is your conclusion reflective? All of those elements that are basically required. And then when you get to the local stage, then you're going to be looking at how well said are these things. So not just have I done them, but how well have I done them. You don't want to be adding any substantial content when you're in the local phase. You want to instead be polishing the content that you've already come up with. So we're kind of in this stage, and then at the very end you can get to the details phase and look at these different requirements and say, have I executed these things? Have I formatted it correctly? Have I made sure it's long enough? And those are kind of the very last minute things that you want to make sure that you have covered. And then of course looking at our strategies, again, these follow along with the steps that I was just talking about. They go in order chronologically. So you're going to get through all the way through all your body paragraphs in your complete draft. You're going to have a conclusion, and then at the very end you can go back and edit it for American English and MLA style and that kind of thing. Also be sure to review the criteria for the grading before you turn in your essay and look at this and say, okay, well, how well have I achieved each of these things and where would I score myself now? Because eventually I'm going to look at this and say, okay, well, maybe it's a B down here and a C down here, but an A up in these areas, and I'm going to average all that out to whatever your grade's going to be. So make sure you're aware of this rubric so that you know how I'm going to be grading you when you turn in the essay. All right, and that just brings me to your homework for this weekend. So making sure that you do everything that you need to finish up for week 3. Of course, you're going to have to do the peer review that I mentioned. Only a couple of you have done that for your partners, so you need to make sure you go in and finish that for tonight's deadline at midnight, due on Fridays. And then you'll have to do your final end of week reflection, focusing on what you learned this week, as well as your plans for your revision of your essay by midnight on Sunday. So that's kind of standard for any discussion. Then you need to do your week 3 journal if you haven't already. I was encouraging you to do that before your discussion, so a lot of you have turned that in already, but if you haven't, do go ahead and do so. Our grammar work for this week focuses on independent and dependent clauses. There are some materials here and a quiz. And then our student success work is a little bit more low-key this week. Deb's just trying to get some feedback with this pre-assessment about the kinds of resources that you use. And then it's the last week that you can introduce yourself to the class in that student introduction discussion for extra credit. So if you have any questions about the assignments that we have left over the next couple days, please email me as soon as possible. And then I will have new updates week 4 to let you know what you need to complete moving forward. But again, email me if you need anything. Thank you.